So I'm going to make this video because there's a lot of criticism about this wailing wall, the wailing wall in Israel. Many people don't know because the rabbis don't know much about the history because their concern is the modern day Jewish faith, not the historical Jewish faith. Well, the historic Jewish faith is closer to agnosticism than it is modern Jews and Judaism. This is not to be offensive to anybody. This is meant to explain why people go to that wall. When Israel was invaded by Rome and they were originally conquered as it were, the Romans took the Jewish leadership and put them in chains, and they locked them up and they put them into like little prisoner camps. And then the Romans built a wall of a temple. They built basically a fortress in Jerusalem to, present and project their authority within the region, using Jerusalem as their, center of operations in Israel. And when they did this, I guess you'd call it the king of Israel at that point. But you could read about it in the Bible if you really want to know. The king of Israel is basically locked up and, shackled and all this other stuff. Not necessarily shackled, but tied up, and they put him into bondage. And the priests, at the time, they weren't called rabbis. They were called something else. They're basically the Hebrew sect of Judaism, or rather Gnosticism, as we understand it now. It's not the same as the Judaism today. It's very different because of this experience that they had. So when they locked them up, they put them all into bondage and enslaved them, and because that's what the Romans did. And when they did that, they emptied out the actual temple and they forced everybody of the faith out of the temple, and everybody that was, that recited the Torah, and anybody that memorized and recited the Torah was basically banned from the temple. And this is when the Pharisees came in, because then the Romans could control it and tax it. Because if you're not aware, the Romans used to tax all religions. So whenever a temple would stand up or something of that nature, or a different religion would stand up, the emperor of Rome at the time would tax that church or that temple or this religion or that cult or whatever it was that existed. They would tax them monetarily and say, well, we want a percentage of the tithe that you receive. And a tithe means 10%, obviously. And the Roman emperor and the military would come around and collect your taxes. They used to attack religion. The United States was the first country that did not actually actively tax religious, because we're the first country to respect different religions in any kind of real context. Otherwise, every other country essentially used to tax religions, but now we don't, because the United States changed it and allowing for a religion to exist without being attached to oblivion. It also restricts the amount of influence the government can have on the religion itself. But going back to the context, why do we see politicians going to the wailing wall? Is when the Romans took over, they built up a fort, and that wall is part of the fort. And the king of Jerusalem, or king of Israel at that time, and the leadership of basically what amounts to rabbis today, basically they're priests of the religion, the Hebrews, were dragged out onto the wall, on the parapets, and where the battlements are on the top, and they threw them over the wall, and they let them hang there, like this, hanging from the top of the wall. And then they eviscerated them, which basically amounts to, this is mildly graphic, cutting their stomach open and pulling their intestines out while they were still alive. And they did that repeatedly until the Jewish revolts would stop. They did that to them repeatedly. So when somebody calls that the Holy Land and all this stuff, and when Jesus went in and he fought against the Pharisees and he tried chasing them out of the temple and all this other stuff, people called this the Holy Land, because then the Romans just decided, well, we had so much of this rebellion going on in Jerusalem, we have to decide whether or not to, are we going to crucify this guy? What, you guys get to decide, because we've already we've killed so many of your people already. That's basically what it amounted to. That's why they gave them the choice of what to do to Jesus. And Barabbas had been one of them for a long time. He had gone through the oppression of the Romans, and Jesus was basically a stranger. Came out from the middle of the jungle, and he tried to pretend, in their view, he pretended to be the king of the Jews, and in reality, he fulfilled the prophecy as it was written. And then, so the Jewish people, not being, their priests were gone, and the Pharisees were all that was left. And the Pharisees kept the Romans from going around and crucifying more Jewish people or more Israelites in that sense, because the Pharisees were basically grifting money for the Roman emperor to keep the Roman soldiers off of them. And so basically, unfortunately, Jesus Christ was crucified on Temple Mount, which is on the other side of the town. But you see today, the reason why the Jewish people go after the wall, and they go up there and they go to, it's called the Wailing Wall now in English. It's not called the Wailing Wall in modern Hebrew. I guess that's what you would call that language. Yiddish mixed with some other stuff. Old ancient Hebrew doesn't exist anymore, and nobody's heard it spoken in like 2,000 years. But the reason why they go to that wall is because it's a remembrance of the fall of what they considered civilized society, fall from grace, God's grace, where the modern Jewish people believe that God abandoned them at that point, or sent them and cast them out to trials and tribulations. The trials and tribulations had started way before that, when the island of Tyre was the last refuge of the ancient Israeli Empire at the end of King Solomon's reign, and the Babylonians invaded and stuff like that. But prior to this conversation, a lot of people were mad that the president went there and went to the wall and he prayed at the wall and all that other stuff. As is Jewish tradition, modern Jewish tradition has this as the tradition: when you come to Israel or you go to Israel, you pray at that wall, because you're commemorating the people who were barbarically slaughtered by the Romans, who are basically evil in the mindset of that era. Even today, we consider them to be, not good people. And modern day, that a lot of Europeans feel that we owe them a debt because of what the Romans took from them. And me personally, I'm not in that crowd, because it's not a conversation that I'm even involved in. So I'm not in a crowd where I want to pass judgment on who owes what from the past, because obviously we don't know. And King Herod was terrible, the absolutely worst leader they ever had. What a joke. But yeah, somebody was asking me about that earlier today. Weirdly, a hacker was talking to me over my stream on my, I was watching a stream, don't ask. Not Twitch. I don't watch Twitch. I watch pre-recorded stuff, because I don't trust people on Twitch. I don't trust Twitch as a company. No thank you. But yeah, this is the reason why they go and pray at the wall. It's to commemorate all the people that got executed by the Romans during the fall of Israel, as it were, the second fall. And all the people that were executed there. It was a tragedy. I mean, the Roman method of taking control of an area was very, very, very brutal. That's literally how they did it. The Roman Empire grew so large because they would move into an area and just kill anybody that had any pretense of being a leader in that area. And that's why they were so harsh against the Germans, and the Germans just kept attacking them, because the Germans at the time didn't have any leadership. Because the Germans say any man can be a leader, it's just whoever happens to be the leader at that moment. That's how the tribal instinct of Germans was at that point in time. Same with the Nords when they try to go into Nordic territory, especially up towards Denmark. The Romans just never came back. They disappeared like the Ninth Legion. They just went out to the woods and never reappeared again. And Julius Caesar basically saved Rome completely because he changed part of it, and that was part of the things that he was changing, was that he did not kill the leadership, and that's partially why he was so popular, is because he could reduce the attrition rates of the soldiers after the conflict was over, because he wouldn't kill the leadership. He would make a treaty with them and assign stuff like that. Before that, Rome had a policy of killing the leadership and taking over the position of leadership and saying, now you are subservient to the vassal states of Rome, and we lead over you, we lord over you. That's basically how Rome was beforehand. Rome was very, very brutal. Obviously, that didn't last very long. They murdered him because the Romans, that's what they did. They stabbed everyone in the back until they became, I don't know. Do they still do that? I couldn't tell you. I would assume that they'd stopped when they became Catholic, but there's a organization called the Knights Templar that would beg to differ. Wow. And there's a lot of people who want to be the pretense of Rome. It's like, Rome had no economic stability whatsoever. They lasted for 1,000 years and had no years of economic stability. Literally zero. Everything that they had, they built on the back of slavery and theft. I have very low respect and low regard for the Roman Empire. When somebody usually brings it up, I just immediately think that, the Greeks were way more respectable. At least they had pretenses of being a legitimate empire. They openly stated, we're going to conquer you, take everything you own, and then turn you into serfs for the empire. Alexander was way more respectful to his enemies, and that's why he's called Alexander the Great. And I don't think that Europeans should be in the business of empire building. For one thing, we've got 3,000 years of constant warfare in our genetics and our makeup, and I don't think that continuing that is a conducive environment for, having children or being prosperous or anything else of that nature. So this fight over why do people go over and pray at the wall, it's because they're Christian and they want to apologize in the name of Rome to Israel, the nation or the people of Israel, about what the Romans did. I'm not Roman and I'm not connected to any of that in any way, but I can completely understand why they do so. I don't have any ill qualms about it. I don't hold any low regard to people that do so. And I think it's just a matter of respect to the Jewish people to do so. And it's not that I don't respect the Jewish people. I don't respect Israel's government. I don't think Likud is very good. I really don't think they've done anything good in the 20-something years they've been around. I'm not certain. I think it's longer than 20 years, but I'm not going to go look it up. Everything I've seen that Likud does is just absolutely terrible, in my personal opinion. And it's no judgment on any Jewish people or Israelites, because I'm sure there's many good Jewish people, many good Israelites out there. It's just Likud is terrible. It's just absolutely atrocious with how they treat people, and they do it to their own people. It's just these are your own citizens, and you're treating them like this. It's like no, thank you. I don't want anything to do with you. I don't want to be associated with you. If I know rabbis, I know many rabbis. I know a lot of Jewish people, and I have no issues with them. I mean, we're dealing with an obvious Marxist bent of Israel, like government of Israel funds an obvious anti-American, anti-European Marxist thing going on with the ADL and all this other stuff. And I understand that the Jewish people are mildly paranoid about Germans because Germans are unpredictable and you never know what they're going to do. Trust me, as a descendant of the Dutch Empire, I can 100% understand how you feel about, you never know what the Germans are going to do, because you don't. They're very, very unpredictable people. Some days they'll be with you, and some days they won't be. About as bad as the Scottish. Oh, that's incredibly racist and sensitive. My cousin's Scottish, and he's the same way. Culturally, see these different cultures, and you say, "Oh, it's racism." Now, culturally, that's how they are. Their culture requires them to make that decision with as much evidence as possible, and culturally, it leads them to be very fluid in decision making, which means it can be unpredictable for people who don't do it that way. My ancestors didn't do it that way. Like, I was taught by my grandparents and my uncles not to do things that way, to have a plan, make steps towards a new direction, not to be fluid. Fluid is bad. Fluid means there's no framework from which you can make an accurate assessment to whether or not something is actually worth doing or if it's not worth doing. There's no way you can do any kind of long-term planning or assessment without some kind of groundwork. But apparently the Germans are very good at doing random things. I think that's a skill set they developed and evolved like 2,000 years ago when dealing with the Romans, and it just stuck around because they've been around that long. The Dutch, we haven't been around as long. Only about 1,200 years or 1,400 years of existence, as opposed to 4,000 years, which is what the Germans have culturally. It's a long, long time to have a culture. That's all I had to say. I know I rambled on. Wow, it's crazy. It's a very interesting subject, and to me at least, like the rest of you, I don't really know. Don't be so hard on politicians that are deep in their faith, because they're deep in their faith, and that's a good thing, because it means you can rely on them to, do the right thing for the most part, even if you don't agree with the end results of doing the right thing. This idea that you can just base everything on science, I'm going to tell you right now, you can't, because you don't have enough evidence to do anything, because the science we're speaking of is economics, and there's no way to predict the future. You have no idea how difficult it is to do any kind of advanced branch prediction in economics. It is very time consuming, very, 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 very time consuming. It could take 10, 12 hours to do one formula, because you have to do every single variable, and a multivariable analysis is very difficult. And you're like, oh, we can do it with computers. No, you can't. You can't do it with computers. Not yet. Getting close though. Getting close.